Good morning. It is the morning here and I just got my cup of coffee made. There's nothing like when it's like a chilly morning, the house is quiet. I actually have off of work today and get to have my coffee and hang out a little bit with you. Today we're going to go over the sourdough frequently asked questions. So I had put something, I think a post out on YouTube. I did the same on Instagram. I got a ton of responses. I am very thankful for that because I want to be able to answer your questions. I'm going to try to go through and kind of group them. Because a lot of the questions may not have been worded the exact same, but they were looking for the same type of answer. So I'm gonna kind of group them, answer as best as I can, and then I may be deferring a couple of things because I've got some more videos coming all about sourdough. But let's just dive right in. Okay, these are in no particular order, but like I said, I am gonna try to group them. We're gonna start with the starter, and I brought my starter over here. And so one of the questions is, how do you care for your starter? And I am going to be doing a video, hoping to start filming that soon, with all about starter and discard. How do you take care of it? Where do you store it? What do you do with it? How do you know when to discard? So that is coming, but I do want to help answer today. And so I just took this out of the refrigerator. You can see, even though my rubber band is right there, that's just from when I last used it. My starter is actually right here. And I have a lid on it. When I am not using my starter, which basically means I have not fed it or I am not planning to feed it within the next 24 to maybe 48 hours, I put a lid on it and put it in the refrigerator. I am baking bread once, sometimes maybe twice a week. And when I'm done, I put it in the fridge because I'm not gonna be baking bread within the next day or two. I might do it in 3 or 4 days, but not within the next day or two. I like to keep my starter out on the counter if I plan on using it within 2 days. There's no steadfast rule with this. I'm just telling you what I do. If I'm not going to be using it and feeding it and having it grow within the next 2 days, I put a lid on, put it in the refrigerator. And you want to put a lid on because it can dry out. And so it's important that that doesn't happen. This can stay in your refrigerator for, gosh, probably a month. I haven't had it stay that long, but I know that's possible. You might not want to let it go much further than that. And I would just say if you don't plan on using it for an extended period of time, maybe look into dehydrating part of your starter so that you can have something as a backup later on. When I'm ready to use this, I will, which I actually need to do it soon, take the lid off. And I always have a piece of fabric and a canning ring. And so I am just gonna put that on. So I just put my fabric on, and it is a little bit crusty on the underside. Sometimes I'll change my fabric out once every 2 months or so. Put my ring on, and now this can go on the counter. The reason you can't keep this on the counter or any kind of sealed lid is because this is a living thing. This is yeast. It does need to feed. It does need to have that air, especially for the off-gassing. And so having it on the counter, this is going to warm back up. This is very cold right now, but it's going to come to room temp over time, and the yeast are going to get more active, and they're going to need to be fed. They're gonna need that fresh air. And so don't ever store it on the counter with the lid, on the counter with fabric, in the refrigerator with lid. So that answers actually a couple of questions I had in regards to how to care for your starter and how to store it in the refrigerator. As far as caring for it, right? If you're not using it, it's in the fridge. If you're gonna use it, you're gonna feed it. Okay, feeding your starter. People are going to ask, and I have been asked, right? What am I feeding it? What type of flour am I feeding it? Really, it's just whatever you prefer. But I'm gonna hone in on that a little bit and say, I'd recommend you feed what you have and what you can afford. Don't go feed your starter the most expensive flour you're going to find in the store. I actually feed my starter organic, unbleached, all-purpose flour. The all-purpose flour I buy direct from Azure Standard. That is what I use. Now, I don't always bake with all-purpose flour. More to come on that in just a second, but that is what I use to feed my starter. You can use organic wheat flour. You can use whole wheat flour, but I would not recommend it. Again, you can use any flour, but I think all-purpose or bread flour is going to be best. Okay, still sticking with the starter here and feeding it. The ideal ratio of what you're feeding and how much is equal parts flour, water, and your starter. So if you have 100 grams of starter, you would feed 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water. That is where I recommend you start out if you are just beginning, because really a good year or two, and I know that sounds like a long time, but sourdough is a lifelong journey. And once you're in it, trust me, you won't go back. It's very satisfying knowing that you can bake your own bread and bread products without instant yeast and without going to the store. So I recommend for people just starting out, keep it simple. Try to make it equal. I still measure my flour and my water. I don't always measure this to see how much I have, but I usually start with a minimum of 100 grams. I don't go less than 100 grams. This is probably 150 to 200 grams of starter. The reason I say all this is because if you have 200 grams of starter and you're adding 100 grams flour, 100 grams water, the yeast are going to go through that pretty fast, which basically means it may not double the way you want it to. So you always want to have more flour and water than you have starter. So equal is baseline and better is even more, right? But starting with equal and going up as needed is where I always recommend. And that way there's plenty for that yeast to feed on and digest, create those beautiful bubbles, create that doubly lofty action. Last starter question, someone asked, my starter hasn't doubled or it has a hard time rising in the loaf. How do I fix that? Well, it hasn't doubled most likely because you either haven't fed it enough or you haven't waited long enough for it to double. Maybe you fed it too much and it just needs more time. If you haven't fed it enough, then I would take away part of your discard, take half of your discard away, start over and feed again and really give it time. I usually like to think that my starter will double overnight. I usually feed it right before I go to bed. So the next morning it's ready and waiting for me. But I would make sure that you're either feeding it enough or giving it enough time. Now, if it's not rising enough in the loaf, and I'm not sure if that question means during the baking process or during the bulk ferment. Bulk ferment, you're not really gonna see too much of an increase. You'll see a little bit of the dough kind of puffing up and growing, but not too much. Now in the oven, that could actually be a few things. You could have overproofed dough. Are you cooking in a Dutch oven? That's another thing, right? We want to make sure we're actually cooking our sourdough loaves in a Dutch oven where it kind of, the moisture is contained and it allows the bread to really explode out. So I would say you possibly are underproofing or overproofing and maybe you're not cooking at the right temperature. Making sure that your starter has doubled first before you go to that next step is critical. I always have a rubber band on my jar. So let's say I had just fed it. I'd be moving my rubber band down here, right at the line, so that in the next morning, 10 hours, 8 hours, whatever, I can see how much it's grown. It's just a really easy, cheap hack to allow yourself to kind of know, has it grown, has it doubled? If it has not, I am not gonna go put a dough together. I'm gonna wait and redo and troubleshoot this and making sure before I go to that next step. Okay, so let's step away from starter and now let's go into the actual process. So one of the questions that I've seen multiple times too is what type of flour to use. I actually filmed an entire video a few days ago about different types of flour and the results in the types of loaves they made. And it was set to release, and then the morning of, I changed my mind. I put it to private because I'm gonna redo it. I basically did all 3 loaves the same day and I want to redo it and really focus on each individual loaf at one time and then kind of edit that together into one video. So that is coming. I want to show you how different types of flour results in different types of loaves. But what type of flour do you use? The best is going to be bread flour. It can be either organic wheat bread flour or home freshly milled whole wheat. There's really just kind of three categories that I'm going to put the flour in. Number one is the all-purpose. Number two is the bread flour. And number three, which is basically wheat flour, right? And number three is going to be whole wheat. So the differences are all-purpose is a mixture of hard and soft wheat berries, and it has about a 10 to 11% protein content. And it's really all-purpose because it's a mixture of the hard and the soft wheat berries. Wheat flour is all hard wheat. It could be hard white, it could be hard red, all wheat berries. Now, both wheat flour and all-purpose, the bran and the germ are removed and the endosperm is the only part that's left. And so it's really soft and fluffy, right? Even bread flour, wheat bread flour, almost looks like all-purpose in some regard because that bran and germ have been removed, but the difference is one is strictly hard wheat, the other is a mixture of hard and soft. The hard wheat, the wheat flour, is going to have a protein content of between 11 and 12, so slightly higher than all-purpose. The third category is whole wheat, and you can either, like I do, freshly mill that at home with like a mock mill or a Nutri-Mill, or you can buy whole wheat flour. And that is also hard wheat berries, hard white, hard red, but the entire kernel is intact through the grinding process. Nothing is removed. The bran and germ remain in the flour. So that's the difference between wheat flour and whole wheat flour. The whole wheat flour, because the bran and the germ are intact in the flour, I keep saying intact, but they're present in the flour, it's actually between a 12 to 13% protein content. So it's slightly higher. So, 11, 12, 13. All three perfectly viable for bread baking. If you are just starting out with sourdough, I would actually recommend you go with the bread flour, the organic wheat flour, not whole wheat, just wheat, because that has the best results for just about anyone jumping into sourdough, and it will give you that confidence, right, that you need to kind of move forward. Once you get that down, you can explore other flours. And somebody else asked, how do you get that airy, lofty bread in something that's not dense? Well, when I am baking with whole wheat flour, I often get much more dense loaves. It's just the way it is. I'll explain all of why that is in that subsequent flour comparison video. But if you want to get that lofty that lofty bread with the holes and the beauty, right, like the traditional sourdough would be, you're going to want to use, in my opinion, first choice organic bread flour, wheat flour. Second choice would be the all-purpose. Along with the flour, hydration matters. I will talk all about hydration again in another video. This is just kind of giving you enough information to go forward, but sourdough, there's so much, and I really want to pick it apart and dissect it to help you digest it easier. Hydration, all that means is the percentage of water to the flour, basically. So easy numbers. If I have 1,000 grams of flour, don't worry about the type of flour, but 1,000 grams of flour, and I'm looking for a 75-ish% hydration rate, I would have 750 grams of water. And so I find with really the all-purpose and the bread flour, anywhere between, I would say, a 72 to 76% hydration is pretty good. It can make for a sticky dough, but usually that means you'll have more air bubbles and it will be lighter. When I'm using whole wheat, I actually just experimented yesterday and did a whole wheat loaf with 80% hydration. I haven't cut into it yet, but I'll do that soon. And again, these results are going to translate into that next video, the comparisons. But hydration is also important. So if you want that beautiful, lofty, airy bread, you want to use bread flour and have probably at least a 75% hydration. Okay, this next question I actually find very interesting. How far off in taste is it from regular bread? Starting out, did you like sourdough or did it have to grow on you? I have purchased from the store and I didn't like it. I've attempted to bake a yeast bread and loved it, but I hear that sourdough is so much better for you. True. I purchased a starter from Azure after I kept failing to keep up with mine. How much time are you spending on this per week, and are these okay to freeze? Excellent questions. I think this deserves really good attention on this because I think these are great questions that everyone thinks about. So taste-wise, yes, it is a bit different. It is different. So the commercially produced breads that are in the store, go read the ingredient list. I mean, it's not just yeast, flour, water. And that's exactly what's in your sourdough bread when you bake it at home. It may or may not be exactly what's in your sourdough bread that you buy from the store, right? There could be some preservatives in that, I'm not sure. But at home, it's just 3 simple ingredients: flour, water, yeast. That is it. You cannot get more basic and primal what I say when it comes to bread, where in the store, it's a long list of all kinds of things. Sometimes sweeteners, sometimes preservatives, sometimes some sort of stabilizers, right? Get away from that. Try to get away from that and make that your goal for the next coming year. But it does taste different. The bread in the store is very soft, right? I can actually feel it. Like if I were to take a bite of bread, like sandwich bread, like it kind of like melts in your mouth a little bit, right? I don't know if it's supposed to do that, but it does. That's what commercially sandwich bread does. Sourdough bread is a little bit more hearty. It sticks with you a little bit more, which again is great for you. So it's not going to taste the exact same. Taste and texture, I should say. So kind of be aware of that. I do think it's important though to go down this road, even if you feel put off by that, because it is so much better for you. So I didn't start out with buying sourdough and really acclimating my taste buds to it and then thinking, oh, I'm gonna go make this now. I actually just dove in and started making it, and this was about 3 years ago. It took a lot longer for my family to get used to it. I mean, that was a pretty big jump. At the time, my kids were 4 and 6, and so it was a little bit easier, but even still, we all know how picky children can be, and there have been plenty of days where they're not digging mom's bread. So it does take time, but if you just stay the course and persevere and have patience, everybody will start to turn, especially if you start experimenting like with cinnamon raisin bread and, you know, the fun breads, that it may help warm them over. But for myself, it is a different taste, but it didn't take me long to kind of appreciate it because I knew how much better it was for me. I spend, and I am not exaggerating here, I'm gonna say 1 hour of active hands-on time a week for our sourdough. I mean, really, 1 hour hands-on. And that is feeding the starter, putting the dough together, doing the series of pulls and folds, putting it in the banneton, putting it in the fridge, taking it out of the fridge, and putting it in the oven. I don't count oven time because I'm not hands-on. I can turn the oven on and walk away. So I'm gonna say it's 1 hour a week of hands-on time. I want to caveat that though, it's not 1 hour straight, like 1 hour block. It's 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes here, right? It is scattered throughout the day. I will absolutely share a routine that may work for you, because this was another question, is like, how do I figure out the routine of doing this? And so once you kind of get an idea of a routine that works for you, it becomes second nature and it's not a big deal every week. Are these good to freeze? Yes, you can freeze your loaves. I have done it once or twice. Again, it's fine and it's easy to do. What I would recommend though is if you're going to freeze it, slice it first. That way you can just take out the slices you need, put them in a toaster, put them under the broiler, right? And so you just have it that way and you're not having to try to fight through thawing an entire loaf and slicing it and getting pretty slices. So if you're going to freeze any type of bread, and this is not just for sourdough, really any bread, pre-slice it and then freeze it. Okay, next question. I know that a loaf of sourdough bread is the obvious way of working sourdough baking into your meals, but can you give ideas on how to fit it in recipes that are not just basic bread to change things up for the family? Absolutely. I mean, think about what you're doing normally. When I have leftover bread ends or just pieces that are, maybe a little bit harder, I will turn them into croutons. I will turn them into breadcrumbs so that I'm still incorporating that into our meals, either through croutons or breadcrumbs. But you can also just kind of think about anything else you would use bread for, right? So French toast. You can do so much with the discard. Waffles, pancakes, different sweetbreads. There's so many things you can do with the discard. Different video there. But I would challenge you to kind of go back and think on yourself what kind of bread products you're using now in your meal plans and in your everyday life, and think about how you substitute that with sourdough bread. Okay, next question is basically troubleshooting. When you have followed all of the directions, used the same flour, filtered water, you fed it consistently, and you still kill the starter, what do you troubleshoot first? First of all, you're not alone. You're not alone. We've all been there. And so I kind of wanted to, it's too bad I can't kind of go back and clarify some of these questions, but when someone says kill the starter, I mean, did you really kill it? Because I'm thinking you might not have killed it. It's very possible that it's just inactive or it needs more food, right? It doesn't have enough food. But if you have killed your starter, then you're gonna wanna go either build a new one or get one from a friend. And this actually translates or transitions into another question is, how do you start? I don't know anyone that can give me starter. That's okay. I actually created my own starter about 2.5 years ago. And I saved that entire playlist into the sourdough, or the entire video series into the sourdough playlist. So you can actually go back and watch that. But you can create your own starter. Yeast, natural yeasts are floating around in the air at all times, in every kitchen, in every home. You need to capture them. You need to attract them. And you do that by mixing flour and water, equal parts, in a jar, covering it with a cloth lid, and putting it on your counter. And they will come. If you feed them, they will come. And so every day you're taking some away, you're feeding, taking some away and feeding. And you're only taking some away because otherwise you're gonna end up with like a gallon of starter and nobody needs that. So that's why we discard. But you can create your own starter. I recommend that you go to that video series, find that playlist, and learn how to create your own. So if you have killed it, back to that previous question, you're gonna wanna start over. Now, in order to prevent yourself from getting in that situation again, right, troubleshooting, I would make sure, it kind of goes back to the very beginning, make sure you're feeding it enough, make sure you're giving it enough time to double. It is important, the question was mentioned filtered water. It is important to use filtered water or dechlorinated water. Just nothing with chlorine, that'll kill the yeast. And so you don't want to use that, always filtered water. But I would recommend that while you're going through your troubleshooting process, you making sure you're feeding enough and giving enough time. So if you have to measure your discard or your starter first, then understand how much to feed it, right? So if you have 100 grams, feed it 150 water, 150 flour, right? We go a little bit above and give those yeasts plenty. Okay, now I mentioned discard. What is discard? Well, discard is basically inactive starter. This would be considered discard right now because I would take half of it away and then I would feed it to make it active. inactive. And so you'll see recipes that say active or discard. Discard, all that means is inactive, unfed starter. And so having some of your discard on hand is insurance. I don't have any discard right now because I actually just made some pumpkin sourdough waffles yesterday for the week for the kids for breakfast. But I keep my discard in the refrigerator. So I will probably feed this and then put some of it in the fridge in here. Remember, the only difference is one's fed and one's not fed. And so every time I'm baking bread, if I need to discard some, again, just to keep my starter in check, I just keep adding it in. I don't need to have 10 different containers of discard. I just add it in. Now, when I'll open it, sometimes there's like a little grayish kind of liquid that's floating on the top. That's called the hooch. It's basically like an alcoholic type of liquid because the yeast have exhausted everything and all the sugars. There's nothing more for them to eat. And so I'll just pour the hooch off a little bit, add whatever I need to add, put it back in the fridge. This is your insurance should anything happen, but you can also cook with this. There are plenty of recipes that call for discard because you don't have to waste it. It's not necessary. In the beginning, when you're creating your own starter, like literally building it from scratch, you will be discarding because it's not effective enough. It's not active enough. You need to have your starter really active, really kind of the longevity of it, right? This is 3 years old. The longevity of it to be able to say, I got a good discard here. But someone said, right, my biggest thing is all the discard. I don't know how to use it. And so that's why I haven't started sourdough yet. Oh goodness. Don't let that stop you. Do not let that stop you. Jump in. Don't worry about the discard right now. Just keep it in your fridge. I've kept mine in the fridge for months, 2-3-ish months. And then I'm like, oh gosh, I probably should make something with that. So don't let that stop you. Just get into the journey. Okay, and there's plenty more questions about detailed types of loaves, like how do you make a sandwich bread? And how do you make a boulé and a banneton, those types of things. I'm gonna save those questions for when I get into a lot more detail. So I think as far as the FAQ, I've gone through everything I've received, but like I said, I'm working on the footage and filming for a sour discard and starter video, a sandwich loaf video, as well as the flour comparison, right? And kind of how that translates into how the loaves look and how they rise. The last thing I'm gonna leave you with, because I did say that I would do this, is kind of give you how I manage this within our life. Now, I work full-time, my husband works full-time, our children are in public school. We are, no different than anybody else. We're in activities on the weekends, family events. If I can manage my sourdough, you can too, trust me. So I will take it out of the fridge in the morning and just, make sure I put my fabric on and set it on the counter. I just put it on the back of the counter. I don't want to put it where I can't see it because I want to remember it, but I leave it there all day. Go about my day. At nighttime, I will feed it. Go to bed. The next morning, it should be doubled, or at least close, right? And even in the next morning, I gotta get my kids ready. I gotta get myself ready. I'm not putting a loaf together at that moment. When I have the moment though, sometime in that day, I will come back and start my loaf, right? Getting the flour together, mixing the water and the yeast together, the starter, and getting my dough ball created. I'm usually doing that by lunchtime. I do work from home. And then going through the process, it goes in the refrigerator for the bulk ferment, and I bake the next day. Now I could be baking it in the morning, I could be baking it right before dinner, doesn't matter, but I'm baking the next day. It usually bulk ferments for about 20 to 24 hours for us. If that doesn't work for you, then I would recommend kind of flipping it. Take your starter out at night, let it sit on the counter overnight. In the morning, before you have to leave for work, feed it. It won't take more than 5 minutes. Just feed it and leave it on the counter. When you come home and you're home for the night, right after work, you then should have it see it risen. It should be doubled. Then go ahead and put your dough ball together because you're going to be home that night, right? You need to do this on a night that you're home. You put that together. It takes 5 minutes. You're going to wait 30-ish minutes, do your series of pulls and folds, like 30-minute intervals of pulls and folds, and then you're going to put it in the fridge. And it's going to stay in the fridge all night, all really the next day, and then you can bake it the next night or even like the morning after that. So think about how it will work with your schedule and when you can be baking it and when you can be home for those pulls and folds. I hope that helps answer that question. I will go into a lot more detail in that as well in subsequent videos, but I hope that you can really think about making your sourdough work for you. Do not feel like you are, a slave to the sourdough starter and it's like, oh, I gotta do this. No. It works for you. So change your mindset to make sure that this is not drudgery. Thank you for all your questions. Obviously, if I missed anything or you have more, please feel free to reach out. More to come on our sourdough journey. Stay healthy, stay well. Bye-bye.